Ladies and gentlemen, council, we're now on record. Mr. Lambert, did you have something to take up?
I do, Judge. I honestly do not know what the rule is in this case. In 30 years of practicing law, I've never had this come up. So it was brought to my attention on the break that Butch Moore posted on Facebook last night that he wants to videotape this proceeding to put on Facebook. And the gentleman, I don't know his name, in the Alaska sweatshirt down there has been hired by the Moore family to videotape this, as opposed to being here for a news agency. I've never had that happen. I don't know what the rule is on it. I don't know if it's allowed or not. So I raised the question as to whether it can be done or not. I don't know whether his request was brought to the court as I'm here for a news agency, or was it, I don't know what the result of it is. You know, was it here on behalf of the Moores? But I'm concerned when we have a Facebook post indicating that the Moore family wants to put this on Facebook, and then they've hired someone who's here to videotape this.
Mr. Golodoff, is that true?
Your Honor, prior to today's sentencing hearing, as the court is aware, we've been media covering this case on occasion.
Well, I know.
Last night I did meet with the Moores, and they gave us permission to video record them, photograph them, and they are paying us for the footage.
If that's the case, then your presence here needs to be approved by the presiding judge. I disallowed a similar private operation to be here this morning. There was a deposition firm that wanted to videotape this proceeding for some reason other than the purpose of media coverage, and the rule is Rule 50 says if it's not news for the purpose of news coverage, then to be here has to be approved by the presiding judge, not me. So if you're here being paid by the Moores for the purposes of their Facebook posting, you have to be approved by the presiding judge. So
I will be publishing it on YouTube.
if you're being paid, are you being paid by the Moores?
I'm not being paid right now, no.
I think he just said he's being paid for the footage by the Moores.
The media footage aftermath, but I don't think it should be published on Facebook by them.
Mr. Moore, clear this up, please.
Yes, Your Honor, Butch Moore. There was a request by one of Bree's friends who's in college and asked if they could watch the proceedings via live stream, and I posted back no, but it's being covered and we're going to have a DVD made that you could come to our house and watch afterwards when you get back from college. You don't need to buy a ticket to come to the proceedings. So I was aware Mr. Golodoff was covering this for media coverage anyway, and I asked him if he would be able to make us a DVD so that we could use it in the privacy of our home for Bree's friends and family that can't make it. The other videographer that was here, we had hired that person specifically to video it, to make a video for us for the same purpose. But we have no intentions of posting this on Facebook, and if you were to make a ruling that we could not make it public, I would certainly comply with that.
It's just a matter of what the rule says, and I don't have feelings one way or another other than what the rule says, and it's an administrative rule, and it deals with the form that I use to approve the media here, and it's for news coverage, and it says if it's not for news coverage, then the presence of a person here to videotape it, such as for the purpose you described, has to be approved by the presiding judge, not me. So, Mr. Golodoff, you have to leave, and you have to get your presence approved by the presiding judge, because I said the same thing to the other people that Mr. Moore hired for that purpose. So
How do I go about doing that?
you submit the same form to the presiding judge. And if you want me to disapprove your form that you previously submitted saying the same thing, I'll do that, and you can take it up to Judge Morse, because the other people did. Now, they may be back here later because Judge Morse says it's okay, and that's fine, but I don't have the authority to approve your presence here for the purpose that he's engaged you.
Unless he wants to disengage that.
May I cancel my agreement with Mr. Golodoff and not have him provide us with that and let him remain under the media coverages for whatever purposes?
You may.
Okay, I'll withdraw my contract, Mr. Golodoff. I will not pay you, nor do I expect to receive anything from you.
All right, fair enough.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
May I continue?
You may.
So Dr. Zelig, we were getting ready to discuss the clinical interview, and you were going to describe for us what clinical interview means and what you were going to do, or what you did.
The clinical interview involves a structured outline. It's structured to ensure that the clinician doesn't miss anything that may be important. Sometimes when you interview people, whether you're a physician or a psychologist, the minute they say they have a certain symptom, you assume that's what they have, and as a consequence, you develop, it avoids a confirmatory bias from being developed such that you would overlook everything. So in other words, this forces the administrator to touch all the bases.
What rigid clinical outline did you use in this case?
The structured clinical interview for DSM-4 disorders, and it's listed actually on the first page of this report. It's the SCID, that's an acronym for it. Structured clinical interview for DSM-4 disorders on page 1.
Okay, so when we're talking about the clinical interview now, are we talking about testing that's being done to Joshua?
No,
Okay, what are we talking about then?
we're talking about a structured interview in which I ask him about the lifetime occurrence of all major psychological disorders.
Okay, and what's the purpose of doing that?
It's to make sure that all the bases that he's asked about, all the relevant major disorders, and I have to follow a script. It avoids me from making a mistake by thinking, gee, I know the diagnosis, there's no more need to explore any further.
I guess I'm asking you what the script is.
The script is a book in which I ask the respondent various questions, such as when we're talking about bipolar disorder, since we've already talked about it. I may ask, have you ever had a period of time in which you went a week or longer in which your mood was so high or elated that other people thought you were high or something like that? And then I ask, if they say no, I ask them if they've had a week-long period in which they were irritable or moody, and if they say no to both, then I go to the next section. If they say yes, then I explore further to find out exactly what the symptoms were during that period of irritability or euphoria.
Does it help you identify potential diagnosis of the person?
Yes.
Okay, and so tell us what you did here. Just give us a summary of what you've done.
So I started by getting him an overview of asking him about past treatment involvement, about what his occupation is. I asked him, he mentioned that he'd like to be an attorney in later life. In terms of past treatment, he identified various sort of alcohol programs that some look like they're treatment related, others look like they were more educational in nature. And then I proceeded to ask him about the major categories of mood disorder. And it was during this section that he was asked if he ever had a 2-week period in which he had depressed mood, loss of interest, or the incapacity to experience pleasure on more days than not. And he responded affirmatively. He said that he had such an experience in his life, and that one episode coincided when he was booked into jail on the instant case.
So what does that tell you?
Well, that tells me that that around the time that Bree passed away, which is the same time that he was put in jail, that he is reporting having a major mood reaction to this that has persisted for at least 6 months.
Would you expect that from a situation like this?
Yes, I mean, it's pretty understandable. Not only are you in jail, but you killed the one that you loved. I mean, I can't think of a worse environmental scenario than that to lead to someone feeling depressed.
Okay.
I asked him about other symptoms, and I did make a comment that that maybe instead of an episode of major depression, this is also something that we would expect from a bereavement experience. You know, like when you lose, like I think is all too painfully familiar to many people in this courtroom. So, regardless if it would be called a normal bereavement or major depression, he did have those symptoms of depressed mood and sadness.
Those you're seeing are in conjunction with this event and being arrested?
Yes.
Okay. Not in any other aspect of his life at any other time?
Well, no, he didn't. You know, he was unable to come up with a prior episode of this.
Okay.
So
what does that tell you?
it tells me that I was leaning on the side of a bereavement experience. But I also keep in mind that sometimes people can be depressed. I've treated people who have literally been depressed since they were born, and it's not till you treated them and they felt better that they connected the dots and realized that they'd been depressed the whole time.
Is it kind of like, could the dysthymia kind of be like that? That, you know, Josh has just been this way forever, so that's just how he accepts how everything is and how he acts?
Absolutely. The analogy I make, it's almost like developing cataracts. It can happen so slowly that you don't really know your vision's impaired until you start having real problems. But I have treated like a number of people who absolutely deny being depressed. They'll typically say, nothing bad has ever happened to me, why should I be depressed? I'm just here, doctor, because I can't concentrate, or I can't think straightly. I do testing, and they have this. And then, you know, fortunately, you hope that they trust you enough to proceed with treatment, and then sometimes they're very shocked about how much better they feel. So that again is why I keep underscoring that I use multiple methods to arrive at these diagnoses. But I wanted to start off with what he would tell me.
Okay, so all of these areas we're talking about are based on your clinical interview of Josh?
No, the clinical interview was helpful because it provided his perspective, his opinion.
Okay.
But I used other pieces of information to determine whether or not one of these disease entities existed. And that's why I even have a footnote that someone's positive response in one of these questions is not this positive that they have a mental disorder. You know,
Okay.
but it is a valuable piece of information.
Okay, so after you had, did you talk to Josh also about substance abuse?
Yes.
And just let's be upfront because it's gonna come up, so what occurred during that?
Well, he told me that he started using alcohol when he was about 13 and started using illicit substances when he was 15. That's fairly similar to what he told a person at Aquila. The bottom line being that he started really young. And the reason why that's really important is we know if people start off substances when they're teenagers, it sensitizes the brain in such a way that they're at much greater risk of developing an addiction, you know, an alcohol dependence problem by the time they're adults. So there's a world of difference between people who start drinking when they're 21 versus when they start drinking when they're 14 in terms of what the long-term outcome is in regard to either alcohol or other illicit substances. So, you know, he may have already had the genetics on board. This just made it worse.
So he's got, let's just be fair, he's got a significant substance abuse problem.
Oh, to be fair, it's horrible.
Okay.
Okay.
And we'll talk more about that and what you think about the prospects of rehabilitation when we get further into this.
So, because there are so many illicit substances, and I mean, like new ones popping up every day, I typically give people a list of the major ones and just have them go down and tell me which ones they have taken. And he listed a number of ones that he hadn't really disclosed to anyone else before. And this included like crystal meth. He's abused Ritalin, heroin, methadone, codeine, mushrooms, ecstasy. He told me when I asked him, well, what are your favorites on this list? And he said they were cocaine and other types of amphetamine type substances. He denied, however, that he was using illicit drugs around the time that Bree passed away. Later in the interview, when I was going over his test results, and just for convenience sake, I put it in this section here, he had a really high score on substance abuse, higher than even other people in substance abuse programs. So, given his obvious dependence on alcohol, I asked him, how is it like without your drug, without your alcohol? And he told me, well, I can think better, my mind's clearer, I think I'm less moody. And then I said, well, come on, what's the downside to this? Because everybody in substance becomes a substance addict. When they stop, they're giving something up. And the thing that he seems to be giving up is he says that he's less active, less confident with other people.
Sort of like liquid courage?
Liquid courage, or, a lot of teenagers start drinking, the ones who keep drinking like it because of what we call a social lubricant. They can be social when they're otherwise too shy or not very outgoing. So that may be one of the reasons he liked drinking. I'm not saying that, I don't want to oversimplify it, but it certainly contributed
Okay.
to why he chose this drug
Okay.
to the extent that he did.
Then did he have any head injuries you're aware of other than the one incident when he was a child?
No, he may have had some concussions secondary to his high school athletics.
Nothing that was verified.
Well, there was no verified brain injury. There were some head injuries, but I didn't pick up anything to indicate that an accident happened and he lost cognitive functioning thereafter.
Did at some point you sort of start thinking that maybe he's got a personality disorder?
Yes.
What made you lead to believe that?
Well, one of the most striking things is his intolerance of being alone. Most people are able to go into relationships, end them when it's reasonable to end it, go through a period of mourning, try to learn, and have a better experience the next time. Like maturity in relationships, profiting from your mistakes. One thing that I was struck by is, like I said, from high school, he had a couple of girlfriends, and I couldn't find, when I was trying to put my timeline together, I was trying to find even a 2-week period or so in which he wasn't in a relationship. And not only could I not find it, but Josh himself told me he's never been, this is the first time he's been without a relationship is when he got incarcerated. So that is a red flag. People with borderline personality disorder absolutely cannot tolerate being alone, not being connected with someone, because they get their sense of identity and purpose from the other person. On top of that, there was there were other things that were going on. He revealed a history of bulimia, of overeating, throwing up. There's evidence of impulsivity, of anger, of this sort of anger where he goes off. And in fact, the state was kind enough to provide me with some text messages last night in which we see him going off on Bree for relatively trivial things.
When you say going off, what do you mean going off?
Oh.
You're not talking about beating the crap out of her, you're talking about
Oh, just
verbal?
he would just talk to her in a very disrespectful manner, and I'm glad that you clarified it, because, like, again, I found no evidence that he ever laid a hand on her.
Okay, so the text messages where you just get verbally abusive, and then everything would sort of clear up shortly thereafter, which was consistent with one of the symptoms of borderline personality disorder.
Yeah, their mood sensitivity, they can really get sad. If something happens, they feel that, like one time, I read some text messages, and if I understand them correctly, and sometimes we need an expert on text message interpretation, you know, so I'm doing my best at this, but it looked like he discovered on Bree's phones a long list of male names. And he got pretty jealous and accused her of being unfaithful, only to find out that she was considering the name for a dog she was getting. And they were on the phone. So this woman had shown no evidence of being unfaithful or disloyal to him, and he sees a list of these names, and you know, he automatically assumes he's getting dumped, and he gets angry and starts calling her derogatory names.
And that's one of the symptoms of borderline personality disorder.
Right.
Okay. So when you're doing all this clinical interview, at some point, do you do any testing that helps you determine if he has a personality disorder?
Absolutely. You know, I had a high level of suspicion about this, so I gave him a general clinical test that has a borderline scale on it, and I also gave him a list of personality disorder symptoms.
It's on the front page of your report. It says assessment procedures. Can you tell the court which ones of those were used to assist in determining whether he had a borderline personality disorder?
In particular, the personality assessment inventory and the personality disorders questionnaire.
Okay. And tell us what a personality assessment inventory is.
It is sort of a global personality inventory it's composed of 344 statements. And the respondent is asked to indicate whether they strongly agree or strongly disagree. They have 4 options. And the purpose of this test is to identify clinical disorders, personality disorders, as well as strengths or resources the person has.
Okay.
And one reason I like using this is, again, I'm a forensic psychologist in a forensic setting. He has a lot of motivation to present himself in the way which he feels is going to help him out the best today in court.
And is there stuff built into those to take that into account?
Absolutely. They have a number of scales called validity scales that attempt to determine when a person is exaggerating their strengths, where they're denying having any weaknesses. It also has the opposite scales where you can determine if someone is exaggerating their weaknesses or claiming more pathology than is actually the case. Because, you know, somebody could go either way on something like this. They might want to look as if they have no problems, or they might want to try to elicit a lot of sympathy from the court by saying, poor me, I'm really a sick puppy, cut me a break, you know. So there are all sorts of motivations I see, and that's why I like using tests that have validity scales.
So how did the validity scales come out for the PAI?
Okay, and when I'm answering this, I'm turning to the top of page 14 of my report, and for the most part, he was very candid and straightforward. I could see that There was also a lot of self-condemnation. He was very critical and judgmental of himself, which isn't surprising after, you've killed your girlfriend. And, I could see that his self-esteem was really suffering, but the bottom line is I got a valid test from them. I got one where it was reasonable for me to then go and interpret the clinical and the personality scales and tell this court what those were saying.
Okay, where to come to those? I just kinda wanna go through some of these things and then we'll go to some of these
Sure.
test results. You also did the personality disorders questionnaire. Tell us what that is and how it works.
Well, that's a simple yes/no questionnaire in which a person is presented with all the symptoms of all the major identified personality disorders, and they respond as to yes or no, whether they've ever experienced one of the statements. And when you get an affirmative response, the typical procedure is you go back and you go over it with the respondent to see if they are indeed, you want to make sure they're not talking about that an affirmative response is referring to a one-time incident in their life. Because a personality disorder is a pattern. It's a fairly stable pattern of behaving that doesn't occur over 1 day or 2 days. It starts in adolescence or early adulthood, and it's fairly stable for a number of years. So my purpose of going over his answers is to find out, is this a one-time feeling you had, or is this typical of your last 4 or 5 years of functioning?
When you took his background that he gave you, his family gave you, the clinical interview, and these testings that you did, the PAI and the personality disorders questionnaire, was there anything else that you used in helping come to your diagnosis of a borderline personality disorder?
I don't want to beat a horse to death, but the collateral information was very important because that's what initially raised my level of suspicion. And as a matter of fact, of all the mental health there aren't very many mental health records, but there was one time he went to Providence for real mental health counseling. He saw a psychiatrist, and she suspected that he may have borderline personality disorder.
But no actual diagnosis was made as far
I
as you can
believe
tell?
that she put it as a rule out, meaning that, gee, I think this may be going on, but I need to get to know him more. And unfortunately, he was only there for 3 more counseling sessions, so I don't, I didn't see any documentation past that.
Is that the only counseling he's ever had, to the best of your knowledge,
That's the
for
only
psychological counseling?
type of general clinical counseling where, and this was prompted by his mom, who was concerned about his behavior, who was concerned about the possibility of bipolar disorder. And it's the only time I've seen an attempt to really ask him, look, what are your personality patterns? How do you relate to people? Why is alcohol so important to you? What is the benefit you're getting from it? The other programs have been strictly like anger management or alcohol management, and usually using traditional step programs and stuff like that.
Is it fair to say that nobody had ever previously given him an actual diagnosis and said, this is the type of treatment you need, and he started into a treatment program about that?
When you look at the Providence records, he may have started, but when you treat, the ironic thing about borderline personality disorder is that it's a pretty treatable disorder, but you have to have someone coming and seeing you for a year or 2 to turn it around. It takes some effort, and it takes a lot of guts to do it because you have to confront a lot of fears that you have that you've never really articulated. So it's not an easy sell to get someone in treatment. And the most common times I've treated people like this is when they've been in a relationship and someone is forcing them to do it and they reluctantly come, and you go ahead and you make some headway.
So if someone's amenable to going to treatment, I guess this would be the same to any type of treatment. If they're amenable to going to treatment, they can be very successful, and bipolar disorder can be treated.
If they go to treatment, I don't even care if they're amenable to going. If they just go there and sit through it, they eventually get better.
Let me ask you, let's back up again. Let's just kind of start walking through this. So you made a number of diagnoses in this case. I want to talk to you about some stuff you ruled out first. First, we talked earlier and you ruled out bipolar because you couldn't confirm the diagnosis. Is that just a fair assessment of what you
I
said?
wouldn't say I completely ruled it out. What I'm trying to say is I cannot support that diagnosis
Understood.
with the evidence I've received thus far. But if I were to find out down the road that someone was able to make that diagnosis, I wouldn't be tremendously surprised either.
And even when you look at the DSM-5, they talk about that as another problem that often goes hand in hand with bipolar disorder, or with borderline personality disorder.
And substance abuse, because actually alcohol is a pretty good short-term antidepressant and anti-anxiety agent. You know, the reason we don't prescribe it is because of the awful other effects that it has.
So what else I also want to talk to you about is you looked at antisocial personality disorder.
I looked at that in the personality screener that I was discussing, and I ruled that out. And I also ruled
Tell us why you ruled it out.
because to be diagnosed as having an antisocial personality disorder, you have to have a number of events occur to you before you're 15. And those typically involve getting into a lot of disciplinary actions either with the law or in school. And a lot of his misbehavior before he was 15 were one-time incidents, like one time running away. One time he set a field on fire and, you know, my ears really perked up.
That was when he was playing with the magnifying glass?
Yeah, it was just sort of a careless thing rather than pyromania or anything like that. So
Like a kid playing with a magnifying glass to see how hot it gets?
yeah, it's like most of us have done that and created little fires that we step on and no one ever knows. And do it in third grade science class. But so I didn't see any type of behavior that would justify the DSM-4 or the DSM-5 criteria for antisocial personality disorder.
Do you have to have a sort of a conduct disorder early in childhood also to have an antisocial personality?
You must have what amounts to a conduct disorder in childhood to later be diagnosed as having antisocial personality.
Did you see anything in his childhood that indicated he had ever had a conduct disorder?
No, nor in the school records.
All right, so you ruled out antisocial personality disorder.
Right.
All right. And based on everything that you were seeing, you kind of came to the conclusion that it was a borderline personality disorder. Tell us what a borderline personality disorder is. Define it.
This is a pattern of relating to people and life. And I'll get specific, but the reason I underscore pattern is that this is not, I'm not talking about behavior that occurs rarely or occasionally or sporadically. I'm talking about pretty much the way someone relates to relationships, a long-standing pattern. And in the diagnostic manual, they have 5 symptoms, or they have 9 symptoms. And
Hang on, before you go to the symptoms, let me just ask you this. Does the DSM-5 define it as a pervasive pattern of instability of interpersonal relationships, self-image and effects, and marked impulsivity beginning by early childhood and present in a variety of contexts, as indicated by 5 or more of the following, then they have the symptoms?
that's right.
Okay, I want to go through each symptom one by one. So what's the first symptom out of the DSM-5? And I think you have it at the bottom of page 12 of your report,
Yes.
where you reference the DSM-5.
Now, There are 9 symptoms. You need 5 to qualify.
Understood. I just kind of want to go through each one
Sure.
individually and tell us what they mean and which ones you believe that are ones that are noticeable in Josh to come to this
Okay,
diagnosis.
so the first symptom was noticeable in Josh. It's the frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment.
And so explain what that means and how it's present.
It means that when you're afraid a relationship may end, that you go to huge lengths to try to prevent that, which often includes manipulating people, threatening to kill yourself. If you leave me, I'll hurt myself, or if you leave me, this and that will happen. And not surprisingly, some people who have this, they're also overrepresented amongst the population of romantic stalkers, people who stalk ex-sexual intimates.
What's that mean? What do you
Well,
mean?
after the,
Overrepresented?
it means that it occurs at a much higher frequency in a population of stalkers than you'll see in a community normal population.
Okay.
So a lot of stalkers have borderline personality disorder. They can't stand the separation, so what do? They follow their partner. They follow them all the time.
Okay.
Check on them. So
So is this one that you saw, frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment?
yes, and that was very strongly. Every place I looked, there was evidence of that, and I believe that if we looked at the statements that prior partners made to APD, most of them would agree that he had a hard time at the end of the relationship.
Okay.
And the next one is a pattern of unstable or intense interpersonal relationships characterized by alternating between extremes of idealization and devaluation.
What does that mean?
It means that at one time, when you have a relationship with someone, you can see them as being a goddess, having no fault, it's not a very realistic picture of a real human being. And then when you get disappointed, you go to the other side of the continuum and see them as being a horrible, mean person. And this observation was actually the inspiration. There's a popular book out on borderline personality. It's designed for people who have a borderline partner, and the title of it is telling. It's called I Hate You, Don't Leave Me. And it epitomizes that you can hate and dislike someone, but the next moment you're in love with them. But in any event, I didn't see strong evidence of this except from one source, and Josh said that he feels that way. And he may be correct, because this would be pretty hard to pick up just by looking at somebody. It's more likely to be picked up by self-report.
Okay. What's the next one?
Okay, identity disturbance, markedly and persistently unstable self-image or sense of self. And we do see alterations in his self-esteem, not only the way he described himself in a very pejorative manner on the PAI, but there were times when I was going through some of the crime scene photographs, I came across some books, some journals he had written from when he was probably in a treatment program. And I was really struck one time about how he went for an interview at Costco, and they didn't call him immediately to take the position. And for days he would go on about very, very negative and comments he would make about himself and his self-worth.
Mm-hmm.
So then he gets the job and everything's fine. You
Okay.
know, so it's not a consistent view of himself.
Okay. The next one?
Impulsivity in at least 2 areas that are potentially self-damaging. And this is not an exhaustive list, but there are examples. And the examples given in the DSM are spending, sex, substance abuse, reckless driving, binge eating. I mean, we have 2 or 3 of those that I've already discussed. right there. So I think that is one that's sort of, that's unequivocal. He's
So-
got that.
The two areas that are self-damaging for him are what? Substance abuse is one.
Substance abuse, his mother would say his spending, Josh disagrees with that. There was time, I saw some references in his sort of treatment diary that there was a time that he was unfaithful to a girlfriend. I don't know which girlfriend it was because this thing was never dated. The binge eating was a big problem. So that's present. The fifth symptom is recurrent suicidal behavior, gestures, threats, or self-mutilating behavior. He's made plenty of threats to harm himself. He's cut on himself before.
Some of the recurrent suicidal behavior, gestures, or threats are also contained in some of the discovery materials that were provided you regarding statements from ex-girlfriends.
Yes,
And then there was some other stuff in his medical history that you reviewed regarding prior self-mutilating behavior.
yes.
Okay.
And going back to one comment I was making about how I think that there was a positive trend, you know, after he was arrested, he was photographed. To my knowledge, he was not photographed unclothed, so it's not like I could see his whole body, but he was in shorts and I didn't see any, sometimes once you start working with these people, you can see the cuts. And I didn't see any evidence of cutting. The only injury I saw in whatsoever was just that he had a black fingernail, you know, like he jammed it or something like that.
Let's talk about the suicidal behavior for a minute. Is that a common feature, is a common concern, I guess, of borderline personality disorder, suicide?
Absolutely, it's
Tell us why.
because you know, when people threaten suicide enough, eventually they push the envelope a little bit too far and they complete it. The suicide rate of people who meet criteria for borderline personality disorder is approximately 10% over their lifetime. It's actually a more life-threatening disease than a lot of forms of cancer now. So suicidal, his risk of suicide is significant.
That's what I was gonna ask. Do you
Yes.
have concerns about Josh's risk of suicide and over what period of time?
Well, I would be particularly concerned about the next 5 years
Why?
because, you know, he's still in his early 20s. By the time people get into their 30s, there's strong evidence from a number of studies that borderline personality disorder starts dissipating, that we have people who go into like permanent remission and not have the symptoms anymore. So one of the adages that I tell people who I supervise or students is I say, you know, the name of the game with a borderline is if you can keep them alive long enough, you're going to be successful. Meaning that if you can mitigate the suicide risk,
How do you mitigate the suicide risk?
you do the best that you can. You're not always successful, but you certainly talk about this suicidal behavior. I also address how manipulative it is, how unfair it is to other people in your environment that threaten this. And most of all, you try to teach them some alternative means of dealing with their anger and their frustration. One therapist who's written quite a few books on this subject, she also has borderline personality disorder. She even came up with this idea about when you want to harm yourself, she recommends fill up a bucket of water and put ice in it and wait till it's extremely cold and stick your hand in it for 5 minutes. She says, I guarantee you'll feel plenty of pain and the need to hurt yourself will go away without any permanent tissue injury. So there's a lot of people who have come up with some novel approaches to trying to develop more appropriate ways to deal with this impulsive feeling to hurt yourself.
Okay. Go on to the next one.
Okay, number 6, affective instability due to a marked reactivity of mood. I think the text messages show how reactive he is.
What do you mean when you talk about reactive?
That when he's afraid that Bree just had 6 other boyfriends she doesn't know about, and they're actually the name of the 6 potential dog names, all of a sudden he assumes he's getting dumped and he gets hurt and writes her negative things. Most people would check it out. They would say, Bree, who are these 6 guys? And they would be pleasantly surprised, well, actually those were the names I was considering for this pet dog or whatever.
Okay.
You know, they inquire, they do reasonable things rather than assuming that they're being dumped immediately.
Okay.
7, chronic feelings of emptiness.
Was number 6 one that you saw as a symptom in Josh?
Yes,
Okay.
okay.
Number 7.
So number 7, chronic feelings of emptiness. I didn't see objective, I didn't walk in there, I don't know how to really, when I see someone, to be able to see empty on their forehead. You know, that's such a subjective thing. But he did acknowledge feelings of emptiness on his questionnaire. And sometimes people feel that way, feel bored. They just don't feel there's anything to life or anything to them unless they're in this relationship.
Okay. Next one, number 8.
8 is inappropriate, intense anger or difficulty controlling anger. And the references, the examples are like displays of anger, recurrent physical fights. He did tell me that he has been in a number of fights, and as a matter of fact, if we even, the pre-sentence writer, I appreciated that she took the time to look at his disciplinary record in jail, and we know that he's had some problems there. So that fits. Number 9, the transient stress-related paranoid ideation or severe dissociative symptoms. That may be present. Josh would say he gets paranoid when he drinks too much. But normally I don't think he's ordinarily paranoid. So at the bottom line is that of the 9 symptoms, I think 5 to 6 of them were unequivocal. There's just no doubt that he has those. And there were probably another 2 of them that he could have.
Okay, so you came to the conclusion he had borderline personality disorder. You also came to the diagnosis of substance abuse.
Right.
Tell us how you came to that diagnosis and what testing, if any, did you do in addition to come to that?
Well, not only did I rely upon his self-report, but there are about 5 or 6 APD reports that indicate substance use abuse. And one of the most impressive parts of those police reports is I believe there was actually an occasion in which he was taken into protective custody and his blood alcohol was over 0.3. I think it was in the mid-3s. And like, that's a fatal dose to a lot of people of alcohol. That tells me that he has developed a lot of tolerance, and it's almost dispositive of alcoholism. If you can, I would even say it is, if you can get a BAC to 3.5 and you're not in serious medical trouble, that's a pretty strong indicator of a very high level of developed tolerance toward alcohol.
Is it common someone has a borderline personality disorder that they also have substance abuse disorder?
Yes, it is. It's not only referenced in the criteria we just went over, but when we talk about co-occurring illnesses, substance abuse is right up there, commonly found in borderlines, and of course it complicates the course of the illness.
And then the last diagnosis I think that you talked about, and we talked about it earlier, was this dysthymia?
Yes.
Okay, any other diagnoses that you came to?
I believe that there's a strong possibility that he had some post-traumatic stress disorder following Bree's death, and that may be overlapping that period of bereavement or depression. At the time I interviewed him last fall, I don't believe that he had it at that point. It had
Okay.
dissipated, which is often the case with people who have genuine PTSD. It's not always chronic.
Okay. Judge, this is probably a good point.
All right, council, ladies and gentlemen, let's take an hour break for lunch. I know that's a short time, but we have a full schedule and we're just partway through Dr. Zelig. So we will see everyone back here at 1:30. Ready to go?
Judge, can I leave all my stuff here and have the courtroom locked?
Yes, the courtroom will be cleared and locked, so you can leave things here, but you won't have access to them during the lunch hours. So, and that applies to anyone in the galley. You can leave things here, but again, you won't have access to them. So, 1:30 for everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.